Cześć, witam Was na moim kanale Vintage Music Geek. Zapraszam na pierwszą część mojej rozmowy z Tonym Careyem, czyli klawiszowcem, wokalistą, gitarzystą, kompozytorem, producentem, znanym przede wszystkim ze współpracy z zespołem Rainbow, z którym w drugiej połowie lat 70. grał na instrumentach klawiszowych. Jego znakomite partie wzbogaciły m.in. fantastyczne, przełomowe dla muzyki metalowej album Rising. Jego pełną niezwykłego kunsztu i wyobraźni grę na instrumentach klawiszowych możemy usłyszeć w takich utworach z płyty Rising jak Stargazer, czy Tarot Woman. Tony ma na koncie również przeszło 25 albumów solowych, również tych zrealizowanych w ramach projektu Planet P Project. Jednym z najbardziej znanych utworów tego właśnie projektu jest utwór Why Me?
There must be 1,000 other guys. Must be some other way to look good in your eyes. Why am I up here? What do they see in me? Must be 1,000 other places to be. Why me?
Ponadto w latach 80. wylansował takie przeboje, które znalazły się m.in. na liście przebojów magazynu Billboard, jak The First Day of Summer,
And we took off down the highway saying never going back again. It was on the first day of summer. We were the #1 out front runners. On the first day of summer, nothing feels the same. And it feels so good.
czy A Fine Fine Day.
When they pulled that old Houdini like we always knew he would. It's a fine, fine day for a reunion. It's a fine, fine day for coming home.
Z tej części mojej rozmowy dowiecie się m.in. jak wyglądało przesłuchanie Tonego na stanowisko klawiszowca w zespole Rainbow, jak wspomina współpracę jako producent nagrań z takimi wybitnymi artystami jak Joe Cocker czy John Mayall, którzy znani muzycy sesyjni współpracowali z Tonym w ramach jego zespołu Blessings w połowie lat 70., czyli tuż przed dołączeniem Tonego do Rainbow. Te i wiele innych tematów poruszyliśmy w naszej rozmowie, na którą teraz Was serdecznie zapraszam. Przed Wami Tony Carey. Miłego oglądania.
You live in Germany from, as you said, 78, 79, yeah, something like that.
Yeah, 78, yeah.
78. Yeah, so I guess then in Germany there was a lot of, I can say, changes in the music. There was the krautrock, the bands like Kahn, Kraftwerk, etc. And I hear in the albums that you created in this period, because I think technology also was there, and synthesizers or the keyboards. So I think that, like many musicians, you just want to be up to date and want to use this new technology and record something.
No,
Yeah.
no, I didn't think like that. I the only instrument I ever learned was contrabass in an orchestra,
Mm-hmm.
and I taught myself how to play keyboards, and I moved to Germany by accident and didn't know what I wanted to do, and found a studio in Frankfurt where the guy would let me, they'd have sessions booked all day long, and then at nighttime I could play all night long for
Uh-huh.
free.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a piano, he had a Hammond organ, and he had very early polyphonic synths. And then I started recording and learning how to record. And I was 24 and taught myself how to engineer and how to record. And I didn't sing for the first 5 records.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a band here called Boney M, who were huge, they're really huge. And the producer was Frank Farian was a German. And so I had written some songs and sung them. And I drove out to his studio, it was only 15 minutes away, and played these to him just to have somebody sing them as demos. And he said, "You're crazy. These are hits. You have to sing them."
Mm-hmm.
And that was very important to me and helped me a lot. And then I stopped making instrumental records. I wasn't influenced by Kraftwerk or Krautrock or anything. I didn't have any idea what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
I was just trying to figure it out with the equipment that I had. And then the first album where I sang everything was called "I Won't Be Home Tonight." Uh, and it was released. I found an American record label. They released it, and it was a success.
Mm-hmm.
So that was cool. And so I just kept going. And in the 50 years, well, 47 years since then, I've done about 40 solo albums or Planet P albums, and produced about 100 more for other artists. So you basically, I spent 25 years living in the studio when it
Mm-hmm.
was when it was analog with 2-inch tape and big machines and big mixing desks, and you had to have all that. And I eventually got it all myself, my own studio. And yeah, I did that for I think the last analog studio I had was 2005. It was 20 years ago. And um, from the beginning, I played all the instruments on all my records, and drums, bass, guitar, everything. I will get, I still do, and I will get a guest guitar player once in a while if I need something that's very skilled, technical. Otherwise, the solo guitars on my early records, they're all me. And so basically, and I engineered them and produced them and wrote them, and it was just me and an engineer in the studio for 20 hours a day uh, through the 80s.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mm, I think you must hear this music like this synthesizers, crowd rock, etc. So it hasn't hadn't influenced you in any other way, any way. So
No,
it's not.
I was more influenced by Yes.
But yes,
Uh,
yeah.
I thought Rick Wakeman was used synthesizers really well,
Mm-hmm.
and Rainbow was different than the other bands because we used synthesizers,
Mm-hmm.
and not just Hammond organ, and
Mm-hmm.
um, it gave us this prog edge that no other band had in 1976. And my big moments on Rainbow Rising are all Mini Moog synthesizer. And which is funny because if you listen to one of the live albums, like on stage, or you could see that the band is very much based around a Hammond organ, and me on one side and Richie on the other side, and Hammond almost all the time. So we didn't do that on the records. So
Before you joined Rainbow, you have had this band called Blessings.
yeah.
And as far as I know, you recorded some stuff with them, and it was supposed to be released, but it hadn't happened. Do you have these records anyway? This recording?
No, they were never finished at all. It was a $1 million record deal, and I was a teenager, and I had been living in Connecticut, which is right by New York City, and an A&R man from ABC Records heard a demo tape and signed us and flew us all out to Hollywood, and they gave us Gary Katz as a producer who produced Steely Dan. And the first thing he did was fire the drummer, fire the bass player, and bring all these session people in. So we were recording with Jeff Porcaro on drums, and Lee Sklar on bass, and Skunk Baxter on guitar, and the Steely Dan people. And we could never get anything that he liked, and or that I liked, or that anybody liked on tape. And we tried for 18 months, and they spent money like it was they were trying to burn it. We lived at the Chateau Marmont Hotel on the Sunset Strip, and at night we lived at the Rainbow Bar and Grill, and which is on the Sunset Strip, and in Hollywood. So it had gone this 18 months, and nothing was even close to being finished. And I was rehearsing in a rehearsal studio, commercial rehearsal studio in Hollywood, with Jeff Porcaro, Mike Porcaro, and I think Steve Lukather. And I was playing key. I was not singing. I was playing Hammond and Blessings. And Richie was 2 studios down, looking for keyboard players for Rainbow, because he had done the first Rainbow album and wanted a band that looked like Rock and Roll Stars, actually, because the band was that he used for the first record was Ronnie's band, Elf, and they were good. They played well, fine, but Richie was looking for more of a look. He had Ronnie, Cozy, and Jimmy, but he could not find a keyboard player, and he flew. Oh, I don't know how many people, but 50 people auditioned for that job. And I thought it was perfect timing, because if the Blessings project had progressed normally, we would have had an album out, and I would have been touring, and I would have had obligations. And this was actually the perfect time for me to say, this is really boring. Let's do something. So when they asked me if I'd like to audition, I said, yeah. And that broke up Blessings, of course. Cost ABC Dunhill $2 million, but they didn't care. And off I went,
What exactly you played on the audition? Can you remember what?
It was really funny. We auditioned there are sound stages one of them was called Pirate Sound, and it's like an airplane hangar, huge, enormous building with a really high ceiling. I think they filmed The Wizard of Oz there, or famous movies.
Mhm.
And they had turned it into a rehearsal room with a full concert PA, like not a little room where you sit around and rehearse, but like a venue. It
Mhm.
would have held 4,000 people. It was huge.
Mhm.
And I came in a little early, and there was 11 keyboards set up, uh, and a spotlight on the keyboards. So I said, "Fuck it," and I just went over and warmed up, one keyboard to the next, to the next, to the next, and played for about a half an hour, a long time. And I didn't know this, but the rest of the band was in the back of the room watching me.
Mhm.
So after I said, "Well, everything works. Where is everybody?" Uh, Somebody came to me and said, "Okay, you've got the job. Do you want to you, do you want to join the band?" And I said, "Yeah, that's why I'm here." And it was fairly bizarre because I didn't meet anybody first or bring any equipment. I just showed up and all this equipment was there, so I just started playing really loud. Uh, and they had this enormous concert PA. It was really loud.
Mhm.
I know that. And I blew the walls down, and I guess I mean, I know they liked it, and they asked me to join the band.
Mhm. The first time that you play with all the band in the
Yeah, that
recording
day.
studio that day? Ah, okay. They
That
joined you.
day. Huh?
They
Yeah,
joined
well,
you.
yeah, sure. I mean, the whole band was set up because they'd been auditioning keyboard players for
Ah,
weeks.
okay.
So all the amplifiers and drums, everything was there, and the keyboards, on the left, and but nobody to play them. And so right after I said, "Well, it sounds good. Let's play," then everybody plugged in and we played, and then from then on, that was Rainbow.
We can say, okay, as we're talking about Rainbow, your keyboard parts on made big impact on Rising, I can say, and also on Long Live Rock and Roll, also on this
Yeah,
album you
yeah,
recorded the
yeah,
stuff. And these albums are considered now as, I know, hard rock classic albums. They made big
yeah,
impact on a lot of metal bands and power metal bands.
yeah.
Uh, okay, what are your memories from recording studio when you, for example, recorded Light in the Black or something like
We would
maybe.
do it. We would do it this way. Richie and Jimmy and Cozy would play a track until they liked it. I wouldn't play with them.
Mhm.
And then somebody called me. The studio was in the basement of the hotel in Munich.
Mhm.
It was the Arabella Hotel. Led Zeppelin had worked there. Elton John had worked there. Everybody worked there. So they call up to my room and said, "Come on down, take the elevator down, and uh, we'd like a keyboard intro, and we want a solo here, or we want this here." I said, "Okay, you go, leave me alone, and come back in 2 hours." And that's how we did it. And I worked with Martin Birch, who was producing and engineering, and nobody bothered me. And when Martin and I thought something was acceptable, good, he'd call, said, "Come down and listen." They'd listen. They said, "Great. What's next?" And we did it. So for me, actual physical recording time might have been 6 hours, 7 hours, not
In
much
one day?
longer.
In one day?
No, no.
2 days?
We were there for 2 weeks,
2 weeks? Ah, but okay.
but it was my first time in Europe, and it was enough to do in Germany. Germany is a big, exciting city,
Mhm.
especially in the 70s, and drugs and women and clubs and all that all around. So I enjoyed every minute of it. But actually, when it comes to playing, I mean, I did the Terror Woman intro was one take, and then the hard part is there's two synthesizers on that.
Mhm.
And this was before people used click tracks and metronomes.
Mhm.
So the hard part was doubling it and make it sound like I was following a conductor, and I wasn't following anything except what I kind of remembered that I'd just played. And that's what took the longest. The actual intro took, how long is it? It's a minute and 40 seconds, whatever it is. It took maybe 20 minutes, and then maybe an hour to put the second part on. Then it was done. And Light in the Black, Richie wanted a solo,
Mhm.
and I played one in a. It's the only time he ever said anything to me. I played one in a what I consider to be a mini moog range,
Mhm.
high. And he came in, he said, it's good, I like it, but could you try it way low, way lower? I said, yeah, sure. Go
Mhm.
away. Come back in half an hour. And that's the one we kept. It starts off really low, goes back down really low.
Mhm.
And then we had worked out this line. We had worked that out in the rehearsal studio, so that was no problem. He played it first, and then I just put my part on and played it with him in harmony, and it was that easy. And nobody ever said anything basically, critical. They made a couple suggestions. I understand the vocal sessions now, and then I went home, and then Ronnie sang, and I understand that was a lot more difficult because Richie was, of course, in the room with him, with Martin while Ronnie was singing, and uh, a lot of discussion, I imagine, and uh, much more difficult than my session or Jimmy's.
Mhm.
I mean, Jimmy just play a song and he's finished basically, on a bass or a cozy. And but Ronnie definitely had the most work, and Richie did a couple of days of guitar overdubs,
Mhm.
but very simple guitar overdubs
Mhm.
that, well, except for I think he played his best solo ever on Stargazer. That's my favorite solo that he ever played. I think that took a whole afternoon, maybe even. He tried it a lot of different ways until he found what he liked. But I played my stuff. I mean, a lot of times I'll tell people I did that album in 10 minutes. I mean, 20 minutes because it kind of had that feeling.
Mhm. Mhm.
But then the music was finished, and then Ronnie had sang, and Cozy had a tape, which I got a copy of, which they later released on the deluxe edition.
Mhm.
Is
Mhm.
Sounds just like the record. It is just like the record, except that we had two introductions. There was also an introduction for Stargazer, but it doesn't make any sense at all to have two Mini Moog introductions on a 6-song record. So I just said, keep what you want, and they kept Terror Woman.
I think you said also about it that in the concerts while you were performing with Rainbow, it was quite different than the songs sound differently because you improvising. You like this improvising vibe, like you said. One of your favorite records is Beaches Brew,
Exactly
Miles
that.
Davis, yeah. So
Exactly that.
generally, you have it on the mind this this album, and I don't know yeah, how it
Not on
will
my,
work.
I don't have it on my mind, but it changed my life
Yeah, yeah.
about playing live. I mean, when I heard Bitches Brew, I was 16,
Mhm.
and I already had a band, and my view of playing live was to learn a song and then play it every time the same way. Then I heard Bitches Brew, and I saw Miles twice, and realized that it doesn't have to be that way. You could just play what you feel on any night, and if the people like it, great. If they don't, fuck them, and play what you feel. And that's what music is channeling some kind of emotion from the sky through your brain, through your fingers, through some speakers, and that's basically what it is. I saw Miles play, I think 2 hours, I think with 3 songs, you know, and he would just sit there, coolest guy in the world with his red trumpet, and he'd just point to somebody and they'd play, you know, point to Herbie Hancock, he'd play, Chick Corea, he'd play, Jack DeJohnette on drums, he'd play, you know, just amazing. The whole thing improvised. They had, as did Rainbow, they had parts that had to be there. I mean, you know, there's a verse and a chorus, and you know, but everything else is always improvised. Richie never played the same solo twice. I never played the songs the same way twice. If you listen to any of the bootlegs, and there's a bootleg for every concert I think we ever did, you'll see that I don't ever play the same thing twice or repeat myself, which is how it should be, because music. I mean, I don't want to ever have the idea that music is work. They say we don't work music, we play music, and it's the difference between working and playing. And when you're playing, just let it out, you know, whatever's in. And that's why sometimes Catch the Rainbow would be 7 minutes long. Sometimes it would be 18 minutes long, and it didn't really matter. Or the same with Stargazer. Sometimes it would be a quarter of an hour, and sometimes it would be, you know, 8 minutes, like the record. And just depends what the energy level was, what the audience was giving back in terms of energy. And so I didn't consciously have Miles Davis Bitches Brew in my head, but that philosophy of how to play music became a part of how I played music
Yeah,
when I
it's
was
like,
when I was a teenager. Yeah.
you listen to these albums, and somehow, anyway, they influence you, even if you don't think about it. Yeah, if you just
Everything I ever heard, I've stolen. Every single thing I've ever heard has influenced me. If it's from Bela Bartok or Igor Stravinsky or Iron Maiden, I've stolen everything I've ever heard, because that's what music is. It's a universal language.
Yeah.
I don't steal lyrics, but as far as music and playing, I don't even think about it. I play what I want to play, and if it's the same thing that Rick Wakeman wanted to play 40 years ago, that's the way it is.
There are good, I can say, there's good examples. Yeah, you can just steal
Yeah.
from them, as you said, steal in the brackets.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah. Everybody, and any good musician is influenced by anything he hears. Really, I mean, any pop song, any disco song, any jazz, anything that goes through you and wakes up some kind of emotion, that's an influence, and that will show up later, definitely, for all of us, basically.
even if you are talking about how long your songs, because now I'm checking Live in Köln, 1976, Kölner Sporthalle. This was released lately. I can see it on the Spotify, and there, for example, I see Mistreated, 50 minutes. Catch the Rainbow around 40 minutes, Man on
Yeah.
the Silver Mountain 12 minutes. Yeah, so
Yeah.
in almost all the songs, each of the songs lasts more than 10 minutes, even
Yeah.
50, 20 minutes. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Our whole set list was, I think, 11. I think we knew 11 songs, but we didn't always play everything.
yeah.
Sometimes
Here's
we
the
didn't,
song.
sometimes we didn't play Light in the Black. Sometimes we didn't play Do You Close Your Eyes? And,
During your time when you were in Rainbow, you also record as a guest on some albums. For example, on Pat Travers' album, Putting It
yeah,
Straight.
yeah.
Can you recall how it worked, how it was to record
Yeah,
it?
they were he was rehearsing with his band at Pirate Sound in another room. It might not have been Pirate Sound. It might have been the other rehearsal. Anyway, someplace he heard me play, and he was in town to do a record, and he said, "Come by the studio and play something on my record." I said, "Sure," and did that in about 20 minutes.
Mhm.
I think it was a mini move, so
Yeah. Also
I
in
think.
this, yeah, the same time, I think it was Jeff Harrison, the singer from the German hard rock
Yes,
band King Pink Mech.
yeah.
Yeah.
But you know what I did on that record? I played bass.
Ah,
That's all I did. I didn't play keyboards. My very good friend, the drummer, called me up and says, "We're in the studio. We don't have a bass player." I said, "Okay, I'll come over." And I brought my bass, and I did the whole record in 2 hours or 3 hours. And so he's got bass, but otherwise there wasn't a bass player. So I said, "Okay."
okay. Any of such such session that you remember? I mean, that especially stick in your mind for some reason, any reason, because of something happened during recording, or I mean, recording as a guest. Have you got something in mind? Some interesting story
Oh,
behind the scenes?
I got millions of stories. Uh, I wasn't a guest as much as I was a producer for a
Mhm.
lot of
Yeah,
people.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I produced Joe Cocker,
Oh, yeah.
and I knew him when I was very young in Los Angeles, and I had a key to his house. He had just a rented house, and he was always on tour with Mad Dogs and Englishmen or whatever. And there was a piano in the house, so I could use the piano in his house. He forgot that. We're talking now 15 years later. And he forgot he knew me. He was, and, but when I met him again, he was all cleaned up. He was in pretty good shape, and he was touring Germany. And we were on the same record company. And the record company says, "Look, we got Joe Cocker in the country. We need a piece of music for a film. Would you like to produce it and write it?" I said, "Yeah, of course." So he had his band because he was touring with his band. They were on the road, and he came into the studio, and we worked a very long day. And then at the end of it, he sang, and it wasn't good enough. And he was not in studio shape. He was in live shape.
Mhm.
His he was never a clean singer, but this was too much, and I couldn't use it. Now the most interesting thing about that session was Joe's manager was Michael Lang. Michael Lang organized
Woodstock.
Woodstock.
Yeah.
And I was more thrilled to meet him than anything else. I was like, wow. And I told Michael, I said, "Listen, the song's great. I'll play it for you. I can't use this vocal. Uh, what do we do?" He said, "Well, wait till we get home. Joe lived in Santa Barbara, which is in California, and he says, "When do we get home? Then send me the tape over with a courier. We'll go to the studio, sing it again, and send it back to you," which he did. And the
Mhm.
vocal was perfect. You know, he'd been home for a month, and his voice was
Mhm.
perfect, fresh, not a touring situation. You know, just easy. And he sent it back beautifully sang, and I mixed it, and that was the record. But it made for a great story. The other half of the story is all this could take a while, is also funny, is that I still wanted to work with the Hammond player and with the percussion player and with the girl singers. Joe thought we were done. So the band says, "Okay, we're done," and drove back to Munich. I was about an hour away from Munich in the country in a studio. Put Joe to bed, let him go to sleep, and then the whole band drove back in the tour bus, and we worked another 3 hours, to the middle of the night, which Joe didn't know about because he was asleep. And when he heard it again, he didn't know about either. You know, he wasn't any kind of technical person at all as far as details. You know, he just wanted to feel good, sound good, and it did. So the whole band, the roadies, the girl singers, the brass section, the guitar player, the keyboard player, the drummer, everybody came back. I said, "Okay, now we can relax. The boss is in bed. Can I have the Hammond again, please? And can I have the tambourine again, please? And can the girls?" And so cute is a cute story.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, you also produce John Mayall. So
Yeah,
wasn't it intimidating? I mean, because it's a big legendary musician from,
yeah.
you know, he invented English, British blues. I can say that the
He gave
Godfather.
Eric Clapton his big
Yeah,
break. Yeah.
exactly. So how it was to work with such legend like John Mayall?
John is Uncle John was a lovely, lovely, lovely guy, and he always, of course, had great guitar players. You know, Eric Clapton or whatever. He had Walter Trout with him,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
this was in the '80s, and Walter was very young.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking in my head as the producer, well, and they weren't bringing equipment. And so I said, "Well, what do I think a blues guitar player is going to want?" So I rented him one of these boutique, very fancy, very expensive, small amplifiers, and that like you'd expect Joe Bonamassa to play, like a blues amplifier.
Mhm.
And Walter came in. He says, "What's this shit? You got a Marshall?" He made a big old Marshall stack rock and roll amp. I said, "Yeah, I got a Marshall." And Walter blew the walls down. He was so loud and so good. We're still friends. I talked to him 2 weeks ago, and Walter's doing well. But that was really, really, really funny because I went to all this trouble and said, "Jesus, the king of English blues. What kind of amplifier does this guitar player need?" "No, just give me a Marshall like Hendrix."
Would like to ask about such albums that many guests, many famous, great musicians took part in. But generally, when I talk with some musicians, they said that they only record the tape or their parts and sending by email, and they don't meet in the studio generally. In this case, was the same. For example,
That's when
yeah,
did that start? That started
mm,
about for me about 2010.
yeah,
But anything in the '80s, no, you had to be there. And I mean, it's
mhm,
before the internet. And then in the '90s, '96, I got my first internet connection, but there wasn't digital recording until it was just starting. And digital recording got to the point where you could actually use it and it be reliable around 2000.
mhm,
And I started sending files off, I think, around 2010. So
yeah,
for the last for the last 15 years, that's the way I've been doing it. My studio is in my house, like it always is. It's 2 stories that way. And so if you send me something
Mhm.
and ask me to work on it, I just did an album for Sign of the Wolf. Well, British American band. Doug Aldrich is in the band, and I'm a big Doug Aldrich fan. So I said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And I said, "Send me the tracks over." So he sent me just basically four group. I mean, they had 200 tracks, but he grouped them into drums, bass, guitars, and keyboards, and then said, do whatever you want. And so I played introductions, I think, for 2 songs, and I played some solos and stuff. But I did all that remotely. I did it in my
Yeah,
home studio here. I sent it back with a file. I haven't met them,
yeah.
you know.
But that's how it looks like nowadays because you
Yeah.
didn't you miss that kind of atmosphere or that kind of feeling that you
Well,
sat in the one studio and
I do and I don't. I tell you what, uh, the human interaction of actually, if you want to use Eric Clapton on your record, you got to fly Eric Clapton to you and have him come in and be
yeah,
there in the
yeah,
studio. Yeah, of course, I miss that. Of course, I miss that. Those were exciting, great times. What I don't miss is anything analog, like reels of tape that weigh 8 kilos and it costs $400 and you can maybe fit 3 songs on them. So doing a whole album, you'd use 20 reels of tape and they could get damaged and all this stuff. And if you want to make an edit, you have to use a razor blade and cut them and then glue them back together, all this stuff. I learned how to do that. I did that for 25 years, and I don't miss a second of it because I can do things with a mouse click now that took me half a day to do in the old days. And I mean, really, just boom, 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 and it's done. And it used to be a half a day's work. My album Pink World, Planet P
mhm,
Project, took 2 years to make because of all the clever tricks that we
mhm,
were inventing while we were doing it. But the thing is that we were inventing our tricks, but so was everybody else. I found this out, of course, much, much later. Other people, there was no internet, there was no communication. The world was huge. It wasn't tiny like it is today. And other people were also figuring out how to do the stuff I was figuring out how to do, how to solve a problem. For instance, you have a 24 track tape and you want to put 60 tracks of background vocals on it. How do you do that? Well, I know how to do it because I figured out how to do it. And so did Jeff Lynne with ELO, and so did, George Martin started that with the Beatles. He made the Beatles on 4 track machines. He made Strawberry Fields Forever on 2 4 tracks, I think. Now if I open up my main music program on that computer, I've I've unlimited amount of. It might be limited to 256 tracks,
mhm, mhm,
but you know, my songs typically won't have more than 12 tracks.
mhm.
And if I'm using a full drum kit, well, that's another 10, so 22. But it's just completely effortless and overkill to even think about going back to the analog days.
Mhm.
And digital sounds better than analog, and anybody that disagrees with that is missing the point. Digital gives you back exactly what you put into it. It didn't always. In the very beginning, the first Ry Cooder CD, I think it was the first CD ever released, 1982, sounded bad. It didn't sound good. But in the meantime, digital recording has gotten so precise and accurate is that if you record an album digitally and press it to vinyl, it'll sound like vinyl because you've pressed it to vinyl. But the analog, the vinyl, adds a sound. This, you put a record on before the music starts, and you hear noise, and you hear the amplifiers, and you hear all that. Well, that's all there in the music the whole time, and that's adding something. The reason that the CD was invented is because in jazz and classical recordings, like orchestral recordings, huge orchestra, and who's a really dynamic Dvorak composer, has passages that are so soft that on a vinyl record, the noise from the vinyl is louder than the orchestra, and it would drive conductors and producers crazy. So they asked Philips invented the CD, and they asked Philips to work on it, and they finally came out with a platform with absolutely no noise. So that was the best thing that ever happened. Not only that, it would take 80 minutes of music instead of 22 minutes aside on vinyl. So you could put twice as much music on a CD. It made absolutely no noise. And if you don't like the sound of your CD, that's because you didn't produce it well. Because a CD, digital recordings give you back exactly what you put into them, exactly what. And if you really miss the sound of Fleetwood Mac records, old vinyl records, early Springsteen records, with this kind of little bit fuzzy, a little bit distorted, well, that's fuzzy and that's distortion. And there are tools now to make it sound that way, to make it sound, vintage, like old. I've got all the tools. Sometimes I use them, sometimes I don't. But vinyl has lost any competition. It lost it 20 years ago. And there's absolutely no justification for taking plastic, putting a piece of metal on it to go through the grooves and going through a big old amplifier. Now, having said that, I know how popular vinyl records are, and I'd like to announce now, I'm releasing a double vinyl edition of Levittown, which is one of my Planet P albums. You can buy it from Amazon or the record store or anywhere you want. And it's a double album. It's I kept the size short. If you put more than 22 minutes on a side of vinyl, you lose quality.
Yeah.
You lose bass. You lose the stereo gets narrower. So ideally, 22 minutes aside is the most you should. I kept this to about, one size 18 minutes, and a couple of them are 20, 21. And Levittown by Tony Carey's Planet P project in a very beautiful gatefold double album.
Oh.
You heard it here.